All right, it is my honor and privilege to be here. I'm so thankful that I came all the way from Germany to see this beautiful mountainous city, and I have to tell you, it is beautiful. Since we're at the last talk, I have a favor to ask you, and that is now that you've seen everything, now that you've experienced the conference, if you were particularly moved by something, if there was a good talk, or maybe you're just really happy with the volunteers, why don't you go tell them? I encourage you to do that, because a little bit of encouragement goes a really long way. So show that appreciation. As mentioned, my name is Tejas. That's pronounced like every syllable after the first in the word contagious. It's just a little mnemonic for you, because it is an exotic name. And for some reason, my tech does not want to connect. Let me try that again. Perfect. And I live and work in Berlin, Germany at this company called Contiamo. What we do is data science and AI and all these cool things, but I have to tell you, the reason I'm there and I'm happy is because of these incredible people. I work with some of the greatest people in the world, and they mean a lot to me. In fact, they're the reason I'm able to come here and enjoy this city with all of you. Today, we're here to talk about a tale of two architectures, as was mentioned, and particularly in the arena of mobile apps with JavaScript. We'll talk about native applications built with React Native, but really the concepts apply to other JS-style native bridges and progressive web apps. And we'll kind of look at the trade-offs between both and see maybe what might be the right tool for you or your team to use in case you decided to explore this area of mobile web applications. But let me start by saying we make apps to solve problems. That's the primary motivator for apps, right? Like some people make apps for fun, like there's like a pizza finder and things. There's just like a Etch-a-Sketch, which we might think, well, this is kind of meaningless. No, it's actually meaningful. Whimsy on the internet is meaningful. Just fun apps are meaningful because they help us deflate. They help us express a sense of wonder that we saw from even Sarah's talk earlier. But also, we create apps like Twitter that help us express ourselves and communicate. We create apps like Tinder that help us meet someone new. Apps primarily solve problems. I'm here today to tell you about an app that I built for myself to solve a very specific problem to me. And then I did build this with React Native to kind of get into that. It was just a learning project. But also, I thought about how would this work as a PWA? And there were some things I learned that I'd like to discuss with you today. But first, let's talk about the problem that I set out to solve. I have a sickness. I have a bleeding disorder. It's called hemophilia. And what it means is that once I start to bleed, I do not stop until I lose all of my blood and then die. And I tell you that because it gets better, believe me. The solution in this case isn't just not to get cut, because little known fact, we as human beings bleed all the time. Like, your body is covered with these tiny little blood vessels, right? That when you throw a ball, or when you climb stairs, if you carry a backpack, like, you start to bleed, but you stop before you even notice. Whereas for me, these things, literally carrying a backpack, have put me in the emergency room. That's kind of a problem, right? Now, there is medication, but it's expensive. And this is actually the reason I will not live in the United States. I cannot live here because of the healthcare. So that's actually why I live in Germany, because it's free for me. And I'm able to live, I'm able to travel, I'm able to really thrive more than just survive. So I have free medicine, I have a good life, everything's great. But the medicine doesn't last long, so I have to top up. It has something called a half-life. And the half-life is 8 hours. So assuming I take 100% of this medicine, 8 hours later, it's 50%. 8 hours after that, it's 25, and it's 12.5, 6.125, on and on it goes. Effectively, if I don't top up after a certain amount of time, it could be very bad for me. And so, well, that's definitely a very specific problem. Hemophilia affects like 1 in 20,000 people. And so I do the only thing I know. I'm not a doctor. I have no interest in biology, if I'm being completely honest with you. But I do have interest in JavaScript. So my solution was, well, let's build an app. If I don't cure it, I might help it, right? And I'd like to show that to you today. It's really nothing special at all. Let's pull up my simulator. Can you all see that? All right, so this app, very simple. It's just a little donut chart that shows me a little graph, a data visualization, and it shows me an estimation of the amount of this medicine that I have in my system right now. I don't have sensors or anything in my body. It's just a basic logarithmic formula. When I take my medicine, I tell it, and then it does math, and at any given time, it will tell me how I'm doing. And this, for me, is the difference between, do I take a bicycle back home, or do I get an Uber? Because one of them will do more damage than the other. And so for usability, I just click this infuse button. I tell it how much medicine I took, and you know what, let's go ahead and do this. I'll delete the false positive later. I do this, and if the internet works, there, it fills up, and you can actually watch it decrement in real time. So this thing is really, really meaningful for me. And so what I'd like to do is walk you through the code of it and talk about some trade-offs between this implemented using native web platform features and using like React Native or some bridge. To do that, let's look right at the code. My screen resolution changed, which is nice. We have more space. Let's go ahead and make this real wide and pull up the index.js. Any of y'all use React in this room? Just so I can, OK, all of you, more or less. So React Native is very similar. If you haven't played with it, it's JSX, right? This file you get for free, it's effectively React DOM.render, but native. And if we go into app, this is where we see the beginnings of my app. It uses Apollo and GraphQL. That's the purpose. That's not the purpose of this talk, although it's really cool. And I want to actually shout out the Apollo team. They're doing incredible work, and they make my app possible. This view here you're looking at in the simulator is called right now. And if we look at the declarative UI, it's quite declarative. You have a container. You have a pie container that contains my little pie chart. And you have some table rows that map directly here to the metadata that I see. You have a log shot button, where on press, I toggle the form. And of course, if the form is visible, then show the form. So that's essentially this behavior right here. This app, though, has a UX problem that really, really bothers me. And when I'm sick and I'm not in the mood to deal with awful UX, I need to fix it, and let me show it to you. So if I say, for example, my usual dosage is 2,000 units. If for some reason I take more or less and I want to change this, I tap here, and I bring up this keyboard, but like it obscures my view of everything else. And it's unpleasant, because now I've lost my context. What do I do? If we look at the code for this, I'm importing a view from React Native, and I'm using Glamorous, which is a CSS and JS library, to style my container. So really, it's a view that contains a keyboard. So I want to make a way for this little view to avoid the keyboard. Well, how do I do that? I know. There's a search website on the internet. So let's go keyboard avoid React Native. Oh, look at that. There's a keyboard avoiding view that I've previously been to, but pretend it's blue. And OK, so we have this keyboard avoiding view. Can you all see this? Sure. And this is, I think, more or less what I want. I'm obviously seeing this for the first time. And so, OK, well, what does it look like? Well, I guess I just import this thing from React Native and use it. Let's try. So I have my editor, and I'm just going to import keyboard avoid. One of these days, I'll learn to type. Keyboard avoiding view. And if I understand correctly, I just need to swap out my view for keyboard avoiding view. Oops. I'm using React VS Code. And then reload my little thing. If the internet, yes. And now it should, oh my goodness, oh crap, it doesn't work. OK. I don't believe in the demo gods. Just saying. Anyway, so now there's some oh, look, there's an enabled prop. Maybe that's what, maybe I just haven't enabled it. Let's go enable it. Surely that's the thing. So let's go here, enabled. All right. This is going to work, y'all. I believe it. I feel it. I feel it in my developer bones. Infuse, come on. Oh, man, what in the, OK. What other, I'm losing time, guys. Keyboard vertical offset. Well, I don't, no, that's not what I want. Behavior, oh, what's this? Android and iOS both interact with this prop differently. A little bit smelly. Android may behave better when given no behavior prop at all, whereas iOS is the opposite. OK. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. A content container style, no, that's not what I want. And then there's enable. There's really nothing here that can do, OK, well, let's maybe go look at the, let's look at this. What do we have? We have style. I don't need this, so I'm using glamorous. And we have this behavior thing. Well, whatever, man. Copy, paste, driven development. Let's behavior equals, what do we got? Height. All right, let's try this. I have no idea what that even means. Like, what is height? All right, let's see. So infuse. Oh my goodness, it disappeared. Like the opposite happened of what I wanted. Why would you do this? And now it's still visible. It's okay. Well, that kind weird. Let's try something else. At this point, you know what? Like, maybe padding. These names. Infuse. Ah, look at that. All right. Woo. You know, and now I don't lose my context. I see things. Now I am a happy user of this app. All right, how long did that take? Was that easy? That was not easy. It was misleading. It was confusing. And this is part of it. I'm not saying React Native is misleading. I'm not saying React Native is bad. It's very, very good. And the team has done a great job. Some of them are friends of mine. It's very good. They've actually taken a lot of measures to accommodate touch events and so on. It's really sophisticated. But there are some things that are not obvious. Now, let's look at implementing this keyboard avoidance using native web platform features. Let's open up, my browser. And we pretend there's a data visualization there. The point of this is not to put a pie chart on the screen, but to show you keyboard avoidance with a web browser. So I click in here. OK, well, it just works. If we look at the code, we have two files, index.html, which is just this, and a style sheet that makes the button red. And so the web platform, for free, will just give you these behaviors. Why? Because it's known. It's like a living standard, so to speak. And so in some cases, using the web platform may be easier than using React Native. And so that was just a little demo. I hope it showed you kind of some of the trade-offs. But we'll talk more about those now. So when setting out to build an app, there's a ton of different technologies I could use, right? I could use Kotlin. Swift has this amazing new declarative UI that's kind of like React, but in Swift. There's a lot of different things I could use. But for me, as a web developer, I think I'm going to stick to my guns. And I was going to use JavaScript. And this is not just me. Here's a data point for you. 66.7% of all developers ever use JavaScript in some capacity or the other, according to StackOverflow.com. I think that is a very impressive number. And so naturally, I'm going to implement my app with JavaScript. Then the question becomes, all right, I've got JavaScript. Do I do it native, so it runs lower level on the device? Or do I do it as a progressive web app? Which one do I choose and why? That's what we'll talk through. So progressive web apps, what are they? They're web apps, standard web apps, React, Vue, whatever you want, web apps that progress into being an app on a device through magic. I'm just kidding. Through using service workers, through working offline, through providing like icons that actually render on a home screen. That essentially it's a web app that works offline that you can save to your home screen, and it behaves and looks like a native app, but it's not. This is a progressive web app, and it's a simplification, I know, but that's the best I can do. Web apps are incredible. They're money makers. They somehow seem to be this Midas touch to business value of most companies and projects. In fact, Tinder cut load times from 11.91 seconds to 4.69 seconds with their new PWA. And when moving from an Android app to a PWA, it's 90% smaller. 90% smaller. That is very, very impressive. And of course, when you have something small, fast, and accessible, engagement goes up. Second case study, Uber. Right? Uber's PWA was designed to be fast even on 2G. And let me tell you, this is somewhere I would give a humongous round of applause to Uber for making their thing accessible. Yes, maybe it's motivated by profit, sure. But there's a significant portion of the world that does not have the fast internet that we have here that could benefit from these services. And by making it accessible, Uber is doing some really great things. The core app is 50 kilobits or kilobytes, gzip, and takes less than 3 seconds on 2G networks because of PWA. Final case study, Pinterest rebuilt their mobile site as a PWA, and they saw engagement increase 60%. Yeah, who said that? That absolutely. That is really, really impressive. Also, users generated more content, and people spent more time on the site because PWAs are comfortable to use and fast, and they work offline, and they're just little miracles. I strongly believe in the value of PWA. If you want to learn more about progressive web apps, I highly recommend following Maximiliano Furt on Twitter. He is like the source of all things PWA in terms of information, and I highly recommend him. Also, he's very vocal about Apple not being nice, and that's cool, I guess. But in terms of architecture, this is an architecture talk. In terms of architecture, PWAs are simple. You write JavaScript, you bundle it, you ship it. Any place with a browser could run a PWA. In fact, with new ES modules and their support in browsers, you could get rid of the bundler. You just write JavaScript, ship it. Especially with like Pika that we saw earlier today. That was so impressive. But while they're easy to create, they're a little bit hard to create right. This is the PWA checklist from Google. And this is not the full list. There's a lot that goes into making PWAs. Google has done a really good job of categorizing in terms of priority. So this stuff you absolutely have to have, like TLS encryption. This stuff you kind of have to have. This stuff you could overlook. But for me as an engineer, I want to do my best and check all the boxes. And if you want to do that for a PWA, that's quite hard. But let's talk trade-offs. Good stuff. PWAs work on all devices for free. And they're really a single code base for everything. They give you a universal experience, meaning you write it once, you ship it everywhere, and since it's one code base, it looks and feels the same. As a web developer, you use the tools you know and love, JavaScript, Webpack. You have access to web APIs as well, so things like the Web Speech API, things like the Fetch API. You know these, and so you can use them and build your progressive web app. It's quite comfortable. And lastly, you can use device features when they're available. So the W3C is actually doing some work to extend the web platform quite a bit, giving you access to sensors on devices. So they published this document early this year in April, and it outlines a bunch of new APIs that are available to you, APIs for all kinds of sensors and things. That said, there are some downsides to PWAs. Mainly, they're a little bit harder to monetize and market, and this is debatable, but I would say this is kind of where I land on this, because yes, you can do SEO and SEM, but you don't really get to put it in all of the app stores. Now, Google is doing some work to add PWAs to the Play Store, and this is amazing, but as far as I know, Apple still doesn't have PWAs in the iOS App Store, which is a significant means of distribution, and that makes PWAs a little bit hard. Although if you have an excellent SEO team, I guess that's fine. You have limited access to device APIs. So for example, if I wanted to set up an app, if I wanted to create a progressive web app where I could set up a geofence, a little zone on the map that when I step into it, do something. When I step out of it, do something else, like turn on the lights at home. I can't do that with PWAs, maybe yet. The UI and UX can be inconsistent because some vendors don't allow you to customize things as much as you'd like. So for example, the iOS PWAs, often like you don't get to customize the area around the notch. At least I couldn't as much as I wanted to. I could set it to like white or black, but I couldn't really do much in that area. And so that's something your users will notice. You're going to be working with browsers, and so sometimes you're going to be working with the Samsung browser, Chrome, the Samsung browser on Marshmallow, KitKat, Jelly Bean. It's a little bit hard to get right. And of course, I'd put security down as a negative point because as secure as your PWA is, it's served over TLS. But as secure as it is, it will never beat the security of being on the device with no connection to the outside world. Right? For my medical app, I want my data, my medical data, to maybe live and die on this device. And that's something I can't do with a PWA. Let's switch context a little bit and talk about React Native. How does React Native look? How does it work? How does it compare to the other ways of doing it? Before we get into that, React Native has seen adoption by a number of big players. We're talking Skype, Uber, OneDrive, Amazon Prime Video, and this is outside the usual suspects of Messenger and Instagram and all these. And in terms of architecture, it's a little bit more involved. So you write JavaScript, but it's not really JavaScript, it's JSX. So it's not native web platform JavaScript. And React Native is a layer that, well, will bind your JavaScript to the system underneath. Right? So React Native allows you to express your functionality in JavaScript, and then essentially runs it on the device. It's all packaged together with the Metro bundler, which is kind of the Webpack of the React Native world, and it outputs different binaries for different platforms. So you get an iOS app, you get an Android app, and other platforms. What's missing here, unfortunately, is there's no output target for the web platform. And so you could land up in some weird, like, my native app supports these things, my web app supports these things. In fact, I've seen this, I think, in the Twitter app, where there's this thing called Moments. And I tried to use the Moments UI either on web or on native, and it was like, sorry, you need to go use it on this other thing. If I tried on native, it was like, you need to go on web. If it was on web, one or the other. And so you can have some inconsistent UI because the web isn't a compile target. There is work being done in this space. There are two libraries, one called React Native Web, and the other called React Native DOM. React Native Web is quite cool, because with React Native, you have these components that are conceptually equivalent to like HTML elements. The view component with React Native is conceptually equivalent to a div, some would say. The text element is conceptually equivalent to like a span. And so what React Native Web will do is, at build time, swap out your references to React Native, and will import those same components from React Native Web, which are just React Web components. It's quite cool, and it allows you to interop with the web platform really well. React Native DOM is another extremely experimental, just a marvel of engineering. Because what it does is it takes a React Native app and runs it in the browser, more or less. This includes the layout engine of React Native, which is an implementation of Flexbox implemented in C++. So it does layout on a separate thread in a web worker, because this thing is compiled to like WebAssembly, right? And so on the web right now, you really can't animate layout without triggering reflows, and it's performance heavy. You can kind of do this with React Native DOM, and it's really fun to play with, but it is highly experimental. To put it simply, React Native Web is web first, React Native DOM is native first. And I tell you that because that changes this diagram and adds a compile target to where now you write React Native and it can go everywhere. And this, for me, is quite significant. So with React Native Pros, you write React once, and you can deploy everywhere. You can easily monetize and distribute because you can get your app in the iOS store, the Play Store, all the stores. You have more ready access to native APIs, so I can do the geofencing thing. And this is important. I can share state with the native OS. So I can, for my medical app, for example, I can integrate with HealthKit with React Native, where I can't do this with a PWA. And this, for me, is really important, because I want HealthKit to have my bleeding data so that it can interface with other apps, too. And lastly, since it compiles to web now, I could even just do a PWA with React Native. The cons, well, you have different APIs for different devices. As we saw in the beginning, like this keyboard avoidance thing, it works on Android, it doesn't work on iOS. Why? So it is real. Man, you see how little hair I have? It's because I tore it out. Seemingly trivial tasks like keyboard avoidance, I need some time to recover from that one. And of course, you require Android Studio and Xcode. These things they're heavy apps. And quite frankly, I have a really hard time with Xcode because it hogs my resources. And lastly, wiring up your dependencies can be hard. And what I mean by this is, like, you have to deal with like Xcode, like provisioning certificates and things like this, which for me as a web developer, why? Thankfully, there's work being done even in this space. So there's a thing called Expo that seeks to streamline and improve the developer experience around the React Native world. Effectively, what Expo does is removes these two negatives and gives you, like, you so much as scan a QR code and you start a React Native app, and you can run it on the device. Expo is really cool, and so that makes the list of pros and cons, I'd say that looks pretty good. And this is why I chose React Native for my app, mainly because of the interop with HealthKit and the ability to just get a PWA for free. But again, you compare architectures, and I mean, that difference is significant. One of them involves JS, maybe Webpack. The other one has a lot more different tools stuff around it. So the question in the room is, when is this over? No, the question in the room, just kidding. The question is, which one should I use? And the answer is your classic answer. It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. It's not 42. It's the other one. The answer is it depends, right? Like, it depends on what your use case is. It depends on what you need. So for me, I need to share state with HealthKit. For me, I need to do all these things. So for me, it's clear. For you, I have no idea. My goal is not to tell you to use one over the other. My goal is to lay out the pros and cons, the trade-offs, and have you make the decision. But I must remind you that, as we said in the beginning, we make apps to solve problems. And it's all about balancing your trade-offs. What do I get if I use this versus what do I get if I use that? But ultimately, at the end of the day, look around you, right? We're here as web developers, but it's the people that matter. And so I don't think there's going to be people using my app. I don't think there's going to be bleeders, like sick people using my app thinking, does he split his code with Webpack or Parcel? I don't think people care. We make apps for humans to solve problems, and so I encourage you, do not let that slow you down, but solve the problems, solve them fast, solve them well, and solve them for humans. Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Do you want to, if you were in a situation where you had to, it sounds like if you had a debate between PWAs and native apps, you'd probably want to be on the PWA side. Is that right, or no?
It depends.
It depends,
I mean, in my case, for my health app, I see more benefit in building on device, so with some type of native binding layer, like React Native, or I think there's native script too. Even ReasonML, I think, compiles to native. And the reason for that is because I just have more control and more access to the system underneath, which I need.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think that there's such less support for PWAs right now?
It's a good question. I don't know if there is less support for PWAs. I mean, could you elaborate? Well,
you were talking about some of the tooling that's kind of hard to deal with, and like some issues with, like, how things render, if I remember correctly. No? Okay. So maybe I was thinking of something else. Okay. All right. So okay. So could you explain or maybe debate with yourself a little bit here? Say you had to debate on either side. Mm-hmm. Just give me maybe just like a 30-second debate for both sides.
Awesome, yeah. So if I was to do a PWA, I would want something like, I would use it for like marketing things or things that I want people to have immediately easy access to, mm-hmm. where they don't mind data kind of leaking to the cloud and living there. If I want to also have it, kind of just write JavaScript and not worry about distribution targets or platforms necessarily. Platform by platforms, I mean OSs instead of the one true web platform. Whereas with native, as I mentioned already, I would think about, okay, do I want to keep my data safe on the device? In that case, I would 100% choose native, because you can create apps that don't communicate with the internet at all. So I would do that. Also, I would think about, do I need, what kind of behavior do I want? Do I want to interact heavily with the local gyroscope or the motion sensors, which you can do via the web platform, but maybe you shouldn't because you have direct access. So ultimately, for me, it's all about access and control. How low do I want to go?
Mm-hmm. Just checking questions here, see if there's any more here. So, so what do you enjoy, I guess, working with most?
That's a really good question. I enjoy working with React Native significantly because to me it's kind of just like writing React Web. It's one thing that I know and I'm comfortable with. Versus with PWAs, I have to think about service worker. I have to debug service worker, which for me, in my past experience, was quite hard because they start, two of them start at the same time and they fight, and it's a little bit messy. Or at least it was. It may have gotten better. But React Native, like I know it, I trust it, it works. So.
So in terms of, have you ever come across issues in terms of browser compatibility with PWAs and mobile?
Yeah, in the past. Not anymore now, but like Service Worker was, I think it was one of those things that everybody was waiting for it to get ready, but it wasn't. And support for it, I think now is universal and good, and everybody's using it. But I remember years ago when I was trying to do things with it and even build PWAs, it was always like not supported in all the places I wanted it to be. So yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess let me just double check questions here before I let you go here. I know we want to definitely have our after party here. So let me just check.
Here?
Sorry, not here. Here, like walking distance from here. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good ending question. What question? Actually, do you have a question or maybe an idea of like the things that you want to see in PWAs in the next year?
Yes, there's one thing, and it's not necessarily with PWAs, but there's one thing that I would just like to see in this problem space, and that is I would love to see Apple extend first-class support for PWAs in the iOS App Store. Like this thing for me would be a game changer.
All right. Thank you so much, Tejas.